The plane was smooth in the sky, cruising above the clouds, first-class seats lined like luxury thrones. Champagne glasses glimmered under soft lights, and passengers were immersed in their meals, books, and devices. But there was one moment that would break that calm. One passenger who believed rules applied only to her. Her name was Karen. Sharp heels, expensive bag, and a glare that demanded obedience. She marched toward him with a sense of authority, as if she owned the cabin. "Sir," she snapped, pointing a perfectly manicured finger, "you can't sit here. This seat is for real passengers." The man didn't flinch. He stood with an almost invisible calm, a quiet aura that seemed to fill the cabin. People glanced up from their screens. Phones were raised in curiosity. Whispers spread like wildfire. It was Muhammad Ali, the greatest boxer the world had ever seen, the man who floated like a butterfly and stung like a bee, the man whose name alone carried respect across nations. And yet, here he was, being challenged by someone who didn't even know who he was. Karen, convinced of her own importance, leaned closer. "I said move, now." The stewards hovered nearby, hesitant. "Ma'am, please, just..." One tried, but she waved them off, her pride bigger than the sense around her. The passengers' murmurs grew louder. Some were confused, some were amused, and some were recording. Ali didn't respond immediately. He studied her, a faint smile playing on his lips, as if amused by the absurdity of the situation. There was no anger in his eyes, only a quiet confidence, a presence that commanded attention without a word. And then, in a voice so calm it cut through the tension, he spoke. "You want me out?" The cabin went silent. Hearts skipped. Cameras stopped shaking in nervous hands. Everyone instinctively leaned closer, waiting for what would happen next. Ali's gaze was steady, his stance unwavering. No one had ever dared speak to him this way, and certainly not in front of witnesses. Karen's expression hardened, ready to assert her power. She had no idea that she was about to challenge a living legend, and the consequences of her arrogance were about to unfold. And in that instant, every person on that flight realized this wasn't going to be just another flight. Something unforgettable was about to happen. The plane continued its smooth journey through the clouds, but the calm of first class was about to crack. Passengers continued sipping their drinks, scrolling through phones, or chatting quietly, completely unaware that a storm of tension was brewing just a few rows ahead. Karen, heels clicking like a warning bell on the aisle floor, approached Muhammad Ali with an air of arrogance that demanded submission. She held her designer bag tightly, her eyes sharp, her voice clipped and commanding. "Sir, this seat is reserved for actual passengers," she said, pointing toward the plush leather seat. Ali remained calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture aggressively. He simply looked at her, eyes steady, a faint smile on his lips. His aura alone seemed to still the air around them. Passengers began noticing the confrontation. Phones were subtly raised, as people instinctively sensed they were witnessing something extraordinary. Whispers spread. "Is that Muhammad Ali?" Some passengers sat up straighter, their curiosity growing. Others tried to turn away, pretending not to watch, but every eye was drawn to the quiet showdown in the aisle. The flight attendants hovered nearby, unsure how to handle the situation. One leaned closer to Karen, trying to calm her. "Ma'am, perhaps there's been a misunderstanding. Please." But Karen waved her off, determined to assert dominance. "No, he needs to move. This is my space." Ali finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "I believe I am allowed to sit here. This is my seat." Karen's lips tightened, her face flushing slightly. "I don't care. I said move." The tension grew palpable. Ali didn't raise his voice or act aggressively, yet his presence alone caused an invisible shift in the cabin. Passengers instinctively leaned in, sensing that this wasn't just a dispute over a seat. This was a test of ego versus respect. Some passengers began whispering, recognizing the legendary boxer. "That's Muhammad Ali," one said quietly. To the person next to him, a few others instinctively started recording on their phones. Even the flight attendants, trained for difficult situations, exchanged nervous glances. Karen, emboldened by the seeming support of the flight attendant's hesitation, leaned forward. "You need to leave now. I am asking politely," she said, her voice shaking slightly despite her bravado. Ali stayed calm. His eyes locked on hers, unwavering. "You want me to leave?" he asked. There was no challenge in his tone, no anger, only quiet, undeniable authority. Passengers could feel the energy in the cabin shift. Every whisper, every movement slowed as people realized the absurdity of the situation. A woman trying to assert power over the greatest of all time, and a man who had faced opponents in the ring far more dangerous than a passenger with attitude. The flight attendants took a step back, sensing that this was no ordinary confrontation. Karen's composure began to crack ever so slightly. She had believed her status and confidence could control the situation, but the quiet, steady presence of Muhammad Ali was unlike anything she had encountered. The air itself seemed charged. Every passenger, from the back of first class to the front, was silently watching, waiting for the moment when arrogance would meet greatness. And in that moment, Ali didn't need to act. His calm, measured presence said it all. He didn't raise a hand. He didn't yell. He didn't even frown. And that's when Karen realized deep down that she might have underestimated not just a man, but a legend. Karen's face had hardened. Her confidence, once absolute, was starting to crack under the quiet weight of Muhammad Ali's presence. She stepped closer, heels clicking like warning bells, and pointed a finger straight at him. "I'm serious. You need to leave this seat. Now," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut through the soft hum of the plane's engines. Ali didn't flinch. Not a twitch. Not a hint of irritation. He looked at her calmly, a faint, knowing smile on his lips. The aura he carried was unmistakable, a force that commanded respect without raising a voice. The cabin seemed to shrink around him, as if the world itself was leaning in to see what would happen next. Passengers were now fully aware of the confrontation. Phones were out recording. Some passengers whispered, uncertain if they should intervene, while others exchanged excited glances. Everyone on board recognized the tension as something extraordinary. This wasn't just a dispute over a seat. It was a clash of arrogance versus greatness. Ali spoke, his tone calm but razor-sharp. "You want me out?" Karen bristled. "Yes, you heard me. Move." A steward stepped forward nervously. "Ma'am, please, sir, let's—" But Karen waved them away, her pride and stubbornness blinding her to reason. "No, this is my seat. You do as I say." Ali's eyes didn't shift. His calm gaze locked on hers, steady and unyielding. He leaned in just slightly and repeated softer this time, but with an unmistakable weight. "You want me out?" The passengers gasped quietly. The subtle difference in tone, the quiet intensity of his question, made the entire cabin hold its breath. This wasn't a threat in the traditional sense. It was authority, confidence, power. Karen, sensing the shift, hesitated. She had expected fear, submission, maybe even flattery. Instead, she felt nothing but calm determination radiating from Ali. She clenched her fists, her ego struggling against reality. I said move," she stammered, her voice betraying her fear. Ali smiled faintly. "You think shouting will change anything?" he asked. "You think anger makes a person strong?" Her face flushed. Passengers started murmuring, some whispering, "That's Muhammad Ali, that's really him." Others subtly shifted their cameras to capture the moment. Even the stewards exchanged glances, realizing that this was no ordinary passenger dispute. Karen, desperate to regain control, leaned closer, pointing and trembling slightly. "I am in charge here. You move, or I call security." Ali didn't flinch. His eyes stayed on hers, unwavering. His voice was calm, almost serene. "Call them. Go. Ahead." he said. The room went silent. The air seemed to thicken. Passengers could feel the power shift palpably. The arrogance of one woman against the quiet authority of a living legend. There was no need for violence. There was no need for threats. The weight of Ali's presence alone was enough. A few passengers whispered, realizing the full magnitude of the situation. "She's trying to kick Muhammad Ali off the plane," one said. "I can't believe it." Others started recording, knowing they were witnessing history unfold. Karen's jaw tightened. Her face was pale, her confident posture faltering. Her eyes darted to the stewards, then back at Ali, as if seeking a lifeline. But there was none. She was completely alone in her arrogance, facing a man whose reputation, calm, and presence made all her threats meaningless. Ali leaned back slightly, still smiling faintly. "Power isn't in fear," he said softly, almost as a lesson for everyone watching. "It's in respect, and respect is earned, not demanded." The words landed like a punch, soft but undeniable. The cabin remained silent, passengers frozen. Even Karen, usually so sure of herself, felt a shift inside, a subtle, undeniable realization that she had underestimated the quiet strength of greatness. The tension was now unbearable. Everyone watched, waiting for the next move. The plane felt smaller, the air thicker as if holding its breath. And in that silence it became clear. The outcome would not be decided by shouting or fear. It would be decided by character, by presence, by the quiet dominance of someone who didn't need to prove themselves. Ali's calm authority had transformed the conflict into a lesson, and Karen was about to learn it the hard way. The plane's hum felt louder now, the quiet mechanical buzz underlining the tension in first class. Passengers shifted in their seats, some leaning forward, some holding their drinks a little tighter. Everyone could feel it. The air itself seemed charged, electric with anticipation. Karen stood frozen for a moment, eyes locked on Muhammad Ali. Her arrogance, once so unshakable, had begun to crack. She glanced around nervously, noting the passengers' stares, the phones discreetly raised, the murmurs spreading through the cabin. For the first time, she realized she wasn't in control. Ali, on the other hand, remained utterly calm. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't gesture aggressively. He simply adjusted slightly in his seat, his eyes still locked on hers, a faint, knowing smile lingering on his lips. The quiet confidence radiating from him seemed to magnify the tension around them, pulling every eye in the cabin toward this moment. A young passenger in the row behind whispered, barely audible, Is that Muhammad Ali?" Heads turned. Phones clicked on. Cameras raised. Even passengers who didn't know boxing could feel it, the unmistakable aura of greatness. It wasn't just that he was famous. It was how he carried himself. How every small movement demanded attention, respect, and a pause in arrogance. Karen tried to assert herself again, her voice trembling slightly despite her bravado. I said move. You don't belong here." Ali's gaze didn't waver. His calm was deliberate, almost surgical, slicing through her bluster. "I belong wherever I'm allowed to sit," he said quietly, each word precise and steady. "And right now, I am allowed." The stewards hovered nearby, unsure how to intervene without escalating the situation. "Ma'am, sir, please." One tried, but Karen waved them off. She was desperate, clinging to the illusion of authority. Passengers' reactions were mixed. Some were whispering excitedly, craning their necks to capture every second. Others watched silently, tense and apprehensive, sensing that this was more than a simple dispute. The energy in the cabin had shifted. What had begun as a confrontation over a seat had become a lesson in power, respect, and presence. Ali leaned forward slightly, his voice calm but carrying weight that seemed to fill the cabin. "You can try to push me out with words, or threats, or intimidation. But none of that changes reality. Respect isn't given because someone demands it. It's earned, and right now, you're learning that the hard way." The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Passengers felt it. Some exchanged astonished glances. A few recording phones captured Ali's quiet dominance, the way he commanded the room without raising a hand. Even Karen, usually so confident, felt a chill run down her spine. Then came the murmurs. One passenger whispered, "She's trying to kick Muhammad Ali off the plane." Another whispered back, "No way. She doesn't even know who she's dealing with." Karen's face shifted from anger to shock to fear. Her fingers twitched at her side, as if unsure whether to reach for a phone, a steward, or to retreat. Ali's presence made her panic visible. Her power had evaporated. What she thought was control had never existed. Ali leaned back slightly, eyes still on her, his smile soft but knowing. "Sometimes people forget," he said quietly, "that strength isn't about yelling. It isn't about posture, it's about calm, measured confidence. That's real power." Passengers watched, silent but attentive. Some had leaned over to whisper to their neighbors. Others held their breath, recognizing the gravity of the moment. The steward at the aisle glanced nervously at Karen, then at Ali, realizing that this confrontation was not going to resolve through threats or authority. Karen's shoulders slumped slightly. She had expected fear, submission, maybe compliance. Instead, she was confronted with quiet authority so absolute that words and threats could not touch it. Ali didn't need to fight. He didn't need to yell. The very air around him had become a force that demanded respect. And in that moment, every person in first class understood. This wasn't about a seat. It wasn't about rules or arrogance. It was about character, presence, and the quiet, undeniable power of a living legend. The cabin waited, breathless, as Ali's calm dominated the space. Karen, for the first time, realized she had miscalculated entirely. And that's when the whispers began to grow louder. Everyone knew the next moment. Whatever it was would be unforgettable. The plane had fallen into an almost eerie silence. Passengers sat frozen, eyes fixed on the aisle where Karen still fumed and Muhammad Ali remained calm. Every whispered word had stopped. Even the flight attendants held their breath, unsure how the confrontation would end. Then it happened. A soft murmur from a nearby passenger rippled through the cabin. "Wait, isn't that—" Heads turned, phones raised, cameras focused. Passengers began whispering louder, connecting the dots. "That's Muhammad Ali, the greatest." Karen's eyes widened. Her confident posture faltered. Her lips parted as disbelief replaced arrogance. She had thought she was confronting a regular passenger, someone she could intimidate. Instead, she had been standing toe-to-toe with a living legend. A steward finally spoke up, voice trembling slightly. "Ma'am, sir, I think that's Muhammad Ali." Karen blinked rapidly, her mind racing. What? No, that can't be." Ali's faint smile grew just slightly. His calm, unshakable presence filled the cabin. "It is," he said softly, his tone calm, almost kind, yet carrying the weight of undeniable authority. "I am Muhammad Ali." The passengers erupted quietly, murmurs of awe and astonishment spreading like wildfire. Phones clicked and recorded as whispers of recognition grew. Some were clapping softly, not wanting to startle the scene but unable to contain their admiration. Every eye in first class was now on the woman who had so confidently tried to assert dominance and on the man who had patiently, silently, and effortlessly taken control without aggression. Karen's face flushed red, a mix of embarrassment, fear, and disbelief. She had challenged a man who had fought legends, stood toe-to-toe with the fiercest opponents in history, and carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had earned respect across the globe. And here she was, realizing that her arrogance had blinded her completely. Ali leaned back slightly in his seat, still smiling faintly. "You see," he said, quiet but firm, "strength isn't about threats. It isn't about shouting or pointing fingers. It's about calm, presence, and respect. Those who earn it carry it effortlessly. Those who demand it are left exposed." The passengers were mesmerized. Even those who had never watched a fight in their lives could feel the gravity of the moment. The plane, once just a vessel in the sky, had become a stage for a lesson in humility and presence. Karen finally opened her mouth, but no words came out. She swallowed nervously, realizing she had nothing to say. Her attempts at control had been completely meaningless. She had tried to push someone out of a seat, and in doing so had confronted history itself. One passenger leaned toward another, whispering, "She tried to kick Muhammad Ali off the plane. Can you believe that?" Ali's eyes scanned the cabin, settling briefly on the passengers recording the scene. His gaze was calm, almost amused. "Moments like this," he said, "teach more than words ever could. Respect isn't demanded, it's recognized or it's lost." The murmurs grew louder. Some passengers started clapping softly in awe of his composure. Others exchanged smiles, realizing they had witnessed an unforgettable moment in real time. Ali hadn't raised his voice, hadn't shouted, hadn't even moved aggressively. And yet the lesson was clear to everyone. Arrogance cannot stand against true greatness. Karen finally stepped back, her body rigid, hands trembling slightly. The reality had fully hit her. She had misjudged the situation, the man, and the sheer presence she had faced, and she would never forget it. Ali returned to his seat with quiet dignity. The cabin remained silent for a few moments longer as everyone absorbed the gravity of what had just happened. Then, slowly, the normal sounds of a first-class cabin began to resume, but nothing would ever be the same. The lesson lingered in the air, undeniable and unforgettable. Passengers would later tell their friends they had witnessed Muhammad Ali handle arrogance with calm mastery, teaching a lesson in humility, respect, and presence without ever raising a hand. And Karen, she had learned in the most unforgettable way that some people command respect effortlessly, and some lessons can't be taught. They must be experienced. The cabin slowly exhaled. What had been tense, charged, almost electric, now settled into a new kind of silence. The passengers, still wide-eyed, returned to their seats. But there was a shift in the air that no one could ignore. This was no ordinary flight. Something extraordinary had just happened, and everyone had witnessed it. Karen slumped back in her seat, her body rigid. Her confident demeanor had been replaced with shock, disbelief, and a touch of shame. She stared down at her hands, gripping the armrest tightly, trying to make sense of what had just occurred. She had thought she could assert authority, demand compliance, and bend reality to her will. But she had been faced with a force she couldn't intimidate, a presence that demanded respect without needing to shout or gesture. Muhammad Ali remained seated, calm, collected, a faint smile still on his lips. He didn't gloat, didn't mock, didn't raise his voice. He simply existed in the moment, embodying the quiet power that had always defined him. And in that quiet, he gave everyone in the cabin a lesson in humility that words could never fully capture. Passengers slowly began whispering again, sharing their awe. Some shook their heads in disbelief. A few quietly clapped, recognizing that they had witnessed history unfold. Cameras still hovered in the air, capturing the scene. Phones and eyes alike recording the unspoken authority of a man who had faced legends in the ring and come out on top, not through aggression, but through presence. Karen finally lifted her gaze, eyes meeting Ali's. Her lips parted as she tried to find words, but nothing came out. She had no defense, no argument, no clever retort. All that remained was recognition. She had underestimated a man who carried himself with quiet dignity and undeniable strength. Her arrogance had been completely diffused, not by confrontation, not by force, but by presence. Ali leaned back slightly, letting the lesson settle in the room. "It's easy to demand respect," he said softly, voice steady and calm. "But it's earned through action, through character, through presence. And some lessons must be learned in silence." The flight attendants exchanged relieved glances. The passengers, once tense and unsure, now carried a newfound respect, not just for Ali, but for the way power and composure could transform a moment. What had begun as a confrontation over a seat had become a demonstration of something far greater: dignity, patience, and quiet authority. Karen finally exhaled, a sound small and defeated. Her posture shifted from rigid defiance to reluctant acknowledgement. She hadn't just failed to assert dominance, she had been humbled, and it was a lesson she would never forget. Ali adjusted slightly in his seat, glanced around the cabin, and offered a faint nod to the passengers. It was not a gesture of triumph, but of closure. The moment had been witnessed, absorbed, and learned. The cabin returned to normal activity, some sipping drinks, some quietly chuckling at the memory. But the energy had irrevocably changed. Even the crew seemed lighter, the tension gone, replaced by a quiet admiration. They had seen a confrontation diffused not by authority, not by intimidation, but by the quiet power of character. The lesson was clear. Arrogance can crumble when faced with presence. Respect, once earned, leaves a lasting impression. Karen looked down again. No words, no excuses. The recognition of what she had done and who she had confronted sank in completely. Ali didn't need to confront her further. The lesson had been delivered effortlessly, silently, but it was indelible. Passengers would later tell their friends, recounting the story in amazement. The woman who had tried to kick Muhammad Ali out of first class, and the man who had taught an entire cabin a lesson in humility without ever raising his voice. And Ali? He leaned back, serene, letting the plane continue its journey. Calm, quiet, undefeated. Not by fists, but by the force of character and presence. It was a resolution without spectacle, without drama, but more powerful than anything else could have been. Respect had been restored. Humility had been taught, and everyone on that flight had witnessed it firsthand. The plane had returned to its steady hum, the soft vibration of engines underlining a calm that now filled first class. But the energy in the cabin had shifted forever. What passengers had witnessed was not just a confrontation over a seat. It was a lesson in character, presence, and humility that no one would ever forget. Karen sat quietly, still processing the events. Her arrogance had been diffused, her confidence humbled. She had believed authority could be claimed through words and force. Instead, she had encountered the quiet power of a man who didn't need to shout, point fingers, or assert dominance to command respect. Muhammad Ali had reminded everyone that true strength is silent and respect is earned, not demanded. Passengers were still whispering, sharing the story with neighbors, some in disbelief, others in admiration. Phones continued recording, though. The moment was more than just a viral clip. It was a real-time lesson in humility. Eyes had been opened, egos checked, and a memory created that would last a lifetime. Ali leaned back, calm and composed, his gaze scanning the cabin. There was no anger, no need for triumph. He had already given the greatest victory, a lesson that words alone could not teach. Respect isn't about status. It isn't about money, position, or fear. It is about recognizing the humanity in others, even when arrogance tries to blind you. He turned his attention to the passengers, a faint smile on his lips. Sometimes, he said softly, people forget that true strength isn't measured by force or intimidation. It's measured by patience, composure, and the ability to rise above anger. What you do in quiet moments often speaks louder than any words shouted in anger. The lesson settled like a weightless truth over the cabin. Some passengers nodded slowly, realizing the depth of what they had just witnessed. Others whispered to friends or family, repeating Ali's words, the calm authority of his presence imprinting itself in their minds. Even the flight attendants, trained to handle conflict daily, exchanged glances of admiration, recognizing that this was far more than any ordinary confrontation. They had witnessed legendary character in action. Karen remained seated, humbled and silent. No words could undo her mistake, No gesture could erase the realization that she had misjudged the man before her. The lesson had been delivered effortlessly, but it was indelible. She had confronted a living legend, and in doing so had learned the importance of humility, respect, and awareness. Ali's quiet demeanor reminded everyone of a timeless truth. Power and greatness do not need to prove themselves. They are recognized through calm, patience, and unwavering presence. The lesson was universal. Arrogance can crumble, authority can fail, but character endures. As the plane continued its journey above the clouds, the passengers carried the story with them, not just as a tale to tell, but as a reminder that respect is earned, humility is real strength, and some lessons can't be taught, they must be experienced. Call to action for engagement. If you believe in true humility and strength, type legend in the comments. Share where you're watching from and let others know you respect greatness when you see it. Who in your life reminds you of Muhammad Ali's calm authority? Tag them and spread the lesson. Remember, it's not the loudest voice that commands respect, the strongest fists, or the boldest threats. It's quiet confidence, humility, and presence. And sometimes, the greatest victories are not won in the ring, but in the simple, silent moments of life. Muhammad Ali walked through this confrontation without raising a hand, without a threat, without a shout. And yet, he taught every single person on that plane a lesson more powerful than anything words could express. So the next time arrogance crosses your path, remember this story. Remember the calm, the presence, the quiet strength that commands respect, and carry that lesson with you, because true greatness leaves a mark, silently but permanently.